Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Fara Carrier Guide. Today, I'd like to talk about plane control. Now, this is the 5th episode of this series. If you haven't seen the previous episodes already, perhaps you want to go back and have a look at general carrier information, commander skills, basic tactics. However, today, we're going to be focusing a little bit more in depth on plane control, using your fighters, your bombers, scouting, and all the intricacies that what you can do with each of your planes. How to bomb, who to target, that type of element. So come along, and we're going to go into our classroom first on the WoW's Tactics Training Room. We'll talk about some scenarios. We'll go through the list of topics we're talking about today, and then we'll go into some random battles and apply what we use in the classroom to see it to good effect. So here we are on our WoW's Tactic Room. And the order of things we'd like to talk about today is structured on the WoW's forum, so you can check out there, or my introduction video showing what we're talking about, and also the video description here on YouTube will explain the list of topics. But first things first, we're going to talk about launch order, such as wave ready times, how to cancel takeoff sequences. We're going to talk about scouting, which planes to use, how we can get an advantage from scouting if we drop our payload of our bombers so they go faster. There'll be a section on fighter micro, when to fight, when not to fight, elements such as sight denial, so they can't see your team, importance of using friendly and hostile anti-air, things about strafing, that type of element. We'll also talk about exit strafes, the issue with the Saipan currently in the game, whether or not you protect your fleet or you protect your bombers with your fighters, that type of stuff. Target selection for your bombers, who to target and why, and then things like patience when they come into play. And then we'll talk about the difference between auto and manual bombing in detail, strike group management, target approach, knowing when you shouldn't bomb, and then after you've bombed, how to get out of the area without losing all your planes. So first things first, let's talk about launch order. When you go into a battle, after we've talked about basic tactics in episode 4, by looking at what the enemy team's composition is, you can realize, are they heavy and anti-air? Are they not heavy on anti-air? Should I do bombers first and go for an early strike? How many destroyers on the enemy team? Them sometimes can make a decision for you. Other times, it depends on the map. Now here we are looking at New Dawn. And on New Dawn, in this particular element, we might want to send fighters out first. We want to see perhaps where the enemy is. Usually, on my personal experience, I like to go fighters first. I don't feel like... Yes, you can squeeze out like one bomber, so you could probably squeeze out one dive bomber if you felt that, in this game, I will not be able to do attacks because there's just too much anti-air. I need to wait till around mid-game to late game before it becomes viable. And in that instance, I would use dive bombers first. They would drop my payload, and then I would tell them to fly, scout the flanks. And we're basically looking for the approaching of any sort of destroyer movement, or seeing where the team's play is. Is it a standard battle? Is it a domination battle? Are there capture points? The dive bombers that have dropped their payload, and we'll come back to this in a little bit about scouting, are quite fast and they can evade enemy fighters. After the dive bombers, I'd maybe then go with fighters, followed up with torpedo bombers. The torpedo bombers would be last, but they're basically held in reserve until I can find myself a target, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, target selection. The launch order is up to you. Know that when you have air supremacy, the captain skill, it increases the fighter and the dive bomber +1 per wave, that is. That means that the loading times, the wave ready times as they were when they're loading, and we'll show this when we go into our training battle, can be affected. The bigger the wave, the longer the time it takes to prepare said plane, which is why American aircraft carriers take significantly longer to take off their planes than Japanese ones, because the Japanese have fewer planes in the wave. And then also, when the planes are in the process of taking off, so you have left click on the map and the plane is taking off, the more planes in that wave, the longer it takes for that wave to take off. Now, it's negligible, but you can notice it with very large waves. It can be 12 or 13 seconds, but on average with Japanese ones, it's 10 seconds. There is the possibility, if you can queue up takeoff sequences, so you can, if you have 6 plane waves, as we do currently on the Hiryu, which we're going to be using today, I can say Fighter 1, Fighter 2, Torpedo Bomber 1, Torpedo Bomber 2, then Dive Bomber 1, and then Dive Bomber 2. The thing is, if the Dive Bombers are ready before the fighters, they'll take off first. If the torpedo bombers, which are always ready first because they're limited just to a wave, they will always take off first. So you have to exercise a bit of patience, tell just the fighters to take off first if that's your intention. And when they're ready, they'll take off, then you can queue up the remaining planes. Additionally, if you, let's say you queue up fighter, torpedo bomber, dive bomber, and you go, oh, you know what, no, I don't want the torpedo bombers to go first. Provided they haven't started taking off, you can actually right-click on the icon of the plane on the bottom of the UI, which again we'll show in our training room later, to cancel the takeoff sequence. You can cancel the sequence because you'll see a little number indicating the order that the planes will take off. So you can right-click on the planes, cancel the sequence, and then take off the planes that you want to in the right order. Usually you might... there'll be reasons why this is effective, such as you may have torpedo bombers attacking a target, and you click on a target, but the wave's already dead, but one wave isn't, and you've got groups 3 and 4, which are the torpedo bombers selected, so you'll find that all of a sudden, even one wave is dead, but you've already told it to re-attack the same target you did before. It's maybe sound a little bit complicated. So that means that this wave is ready to take off and wants to take off, but that might mess with your landing and recovery of your other planes, and it might mess with the whole kind of turnaround and stuff. So you're like, actually, I don't want this thing to take off at all. Well, you right click on it before it actually starts taking off, and then it cancels the takeoff order. So that's launch order control. Now, there is going to be a section on that in terms of advanced tactics in the next episode with regards to managing the landing, the takeoff, and the rotation of planes and the order and priority. But as of right now, on the initial takeoff, on the beginning of the game, it's dependent on your experience on what is the map, what is the game mode, where's the enemy ship composition, how heavy is the anti-air, do I need to support my team first, do I need to do scouting first, can I afford to go bombers first, do I want to do fighters first. There's an element of fighter control, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, known as sight denial. That means you block the enemy planes with your fighters so they can't see what your team is doing. So sometimes in the launch order, you may want to go fighter first in the takeoff. So everything's kind of encompassing around everything else. But we'll move on to scouting. So when it comes to scouting, you can scout with your fighters, right? Many people do. Sometimes you don't have the option. However, I'm typically not a fan of scouting, at least with Japanese fighters, with scouting with my Japanese fighters, because even if I scout a destroyer, eventually I'm going to lose a plane, and that means my wave goes from 5 planes down to 4 planes. Might not sound like much, but if I have not ascertained air dominance yet, if I have not obtained air control, and the enemy carrier has fighters of his own, in this particular instance, then when the fateful fighter duel actually happens, I'm at a huge disadvantage, because it's like I don't have the air supremacy skill, and a straight up 5 versus 4, the 5 wave is going to win every time convincingly. If there's no barrages, there's no other extraneous factors, which means I'm going to be more reliant on having to do risky strafes or playing better than the enemy carrier, because I'm at a disadvantage because I'm down a plane. And that's if you only lose 1 plane. If you continue to scout with your fighter, you're going to lose more and more, to the point where you can't effectively protect against an enemy bomber strike, and you can't honestly protect your bombers when you want to go for an attack as well. So you don't also want to scout with torpedo bombers for the most part, because these are your main damage dealing planes. You want them to go in, make a hit, make an attack run, and then get back to your carrier as quick as possible to turn them around, which leaves our dive bombers. From the Japanese point of view, our dive bombers don't necessarily do a great deal of damage. They're good for setting fires, they're very accurate, we can hit destroyers with them with pinpoint accuracy, and other ships included. However, we can use them to scout without dropping their payload, and they're more of an expendable plane. They don't do a huge amount of damage, they don't do fighter control and that type of thing, so we can use them to scout with, and if they get shot down, hey, it's not our main damaging plane, it's not our fighter plane, it's okay, that is acceptable. Now, there's 2 options here. One is you can keep the dive bombers, attack something such as a destroyer, and then keep it loitering around the destroyer, or alternatively, perhaps at the beginning of the game, you can manual dive bomb the dive bomber in an open piece of ocean, and rather than letting the bomber auto return to the carrier, you can then tell it to fly somewhere else. Once a bomber, torpedo or dive bomber, has dropped its payload, it receives a substantial speed increase. Now, the exact percentage, I don't know the definitive numbers, but what I can tell you is that the dive bomber, once it's dropped its payload on the Japanese side, can outrun American and Japanese fighters. Now, it's very, very close when it's the Hiryu versus the Tier 9 fighters of the Saipan, that's the US premium carrier, but for all intents and purposes, you, if you keep control of your dive bomber, will never be caught by the enemy fighter because you can just keep flying around it. You can just evade it all day long. That's effective because now you don't need to provide fighter escort for your scouting planes. They can just scout all day long. Maybe you can come around behind the enemy fleet. This may cause the enemy carrier to try and vector his fighters into you. That then leaves his front line vulnerable, and then you can go in from attack. That's more of an advanced tactic. We will talk about that in episode 6. But ultimately, dive bombers are the best option to scout with. Now, this is for Japanese carriers. With regards to American carriers, as of version 6.4, this highlights one of the weaknesses of the more planes in a wave but fewer waves that the American carrier doctrine follows. It means that if I was to play, let's say for example, Lexington, and I had 2 fighters and 2 dive bombers, well, the 2 dive bombers are my only form of offense. So for me to use them and then keep them out there and scout, I'm not doing any attack. Or if I just use 1 dive bomber to scout, then I've lost half, 50% of my offensive capability. If I was to play the 1-1-1, that's 1 fighter, 1 torpedo bomber, 1 dive bomber variant of a Lexington or of an Independence or anything along that in the previous line, well, now I'm coming across the issue where, yes, I would use the torpedo bomber to attack. Yes, I would use the fighter to do fighter plane stuff. However, the dive bomber, once it's dropped its payload and scouting, well, now you don't have a second dive bomber. You can't do floodings and then fires and a follow-up. So you've lost half your damage dealing capability in the terms of causing a fire or flooding, that type of stuff. So the Americans suffer because they don't have enough plane waves to be combat effective. They're too big and bulky. Yes, the American planes are good because they have more of them and they're tankier and they can scout a target for longer, but because of the fewer waves, they have lesser map presence. So, for example, in the Tier 10, the Hakuryu from the Japanese line has 8 plane waves. It has 3 dive bomber waves. The American Midway, by comparison, only has 5 plane waves. Now, that can be 3 fighters, 2 dive bombers. It can be 1 fighter, 1 torpedo bomber, 3 dive bombers, or 2? Yeah, 3 dive bombers. It's 1-1-3. Or, as the way I like to play it, 2 fighters, 1 torpedo bomber, 2 dive bombers. But that means you've got 3 dive bombers in total to attack. The Japanese has 6 dive bombers. 6 attacking planes to work with. The Midway has 3 attacking plane waves. So already with the Hakuryu, if I don't want to use the dive bombers, I can use 3 of them to scout pretty much all the entrances on the map and the gaps. And I have really good sight vision. I'm providing fantastic view for my team in terms of incoming torpedoes, in terms of incoming ships, hidden destroyers, that type of stuff, without honestly sacrificing my offensive capability because I can use my 3 torpedo bombers in the Hakuryu, and my 2 fighters are free to loiter and do whatever they need to do. The Midway does not have that luxury because honestly it needs its 1 torpedo and 2 dive bombers to make an impact on the battle to do its damage. So it doesn't have the same scouting capability, and this is one of the main reasons why Japanese carriers are considered superior, at least in the ranked and competitive scene, compared to the American counterparts. So that is scouting. We use typically dive bombers for Japanese. We don't usually use torpedo bombers, and we usually try and stay away from using fighters. Now that is not a golden rule. There will be instances where something needs to be seen and it needs to be kept seen or lit up, and in that instance you use whatever's at your availability. But in an ideal scenario, if we need to spot something with scouting, we would like to use our dive bombers. So, next, moving on, we're going to talk about fighter micro. Now, this is something that is often ignored and has become slightly more complicated in 6.3 with an element known as exit strafing. So when we're talking about fighter micro, in the past, it's been quite, it can be ignored. In previous versions, what would happen is if an enemy, if you were attempting to attack something, you would look to engage outside of hostile ship AA if possible, but if it can't be helped, then so be it. You would engage the enemy fighters, tag them, and then that means these fighters are locked. They cannot do anything. They're basically pinned where they are, and then that would give the attacking carrier, let's say about 30 seconds, assuming he knew he was going to lose the fighter duel. Let's say if it was a Lexington versus a Shokaku, well, in that fighter duel, 2 fighters versus 2 fighters, the Lexington's going to win because it has more planes. But the Shokaku player doesn't technically care because he just wants his 30-second window to make a bombing attack and to kill a ship, which will have a better impact on the game. And he doesn't care that he's losing the fighter duel and he's being depleted. Now, that's more tricky because when a fighter's tag, they can exit strafe. So, let's explain strafing and what that is first. Strafing is the, and we'll show this in this training room, and then we showed this as well in episode 1, I believe, what is the alt attacks. Uses up ammunition, and that is your fuel supply for your fighter planes, which is why in the episode 2 and 3 we talked about taking the additional ammunition module on your aircraft carrier so you can strafe more, and also why you would take dogfighting for additional ammunition so you can strafe more. Strafing is the preferred option. If you find an enemy carrier is napping, isn't controlling his planes, or isn't doing anything, it's basically strafing as a kill box. If you can strafe a target, if you can see planes flying in a straight line that aren't not paying attention, you can strafe into them and then you can kill them all. The risk is if you have a Japanese fighter and you tag a bomber, so you engage it, not strafe it, the bomber is going to shoot back at you. In American bombers, they can be 6 or 7 planes in size. The Saipan dive bomber is 9 planes in size. That is a lot of rear machine gunning attacking your fighters. You might find that your plane doesn't have enough ammunition to shoot them all down, or that you might start losing fighter planes because perhaps he has expert rear gunner captain skill and some signals that boost the effectiveness of the guns on his bombers. In that respect, it's not really efficient. By tagging a bomber with a fighter, you are causing a panic effect, something similar to a defensive fire. So, for example, in this instance, if a bomber is about to hit a battleship and you don't have the chance to get into an angle to strafe it, then you would tag it to cause the panic effect, and then once the bombs happened, you would probably break off because you don't want to lose fighters to the rear gunners of the dive bomber. What you ideally want to do is to come at the target from behind. Now, when a plane is coming down, you either want to strafe, if you're out of time, worst case scenario is a head-on strafe. That's only if you're desperate. You're only going to get 1 or 2 planes because the time they're in the kill field of the strafe maneuver is very, very short. If you come at them from the side, then the kill field is a fraction longer, the time that they cross, and in that respect, you might get 3 planes, and then if you come at them behind from an angle or from the rear, because the plane is moving along and you're coming at them from behind, they stay in the kill zone and you can kill the entire wave. And it's anything that's inside the alt rectangle view of the fighter. So if there are lots of planes all in one lovely juicy little clump, let's say it's a Strike Lexington and you're a Shokaku, and you come at from behind and you're able to strafe them from behind, you kill everything. Oh, it's so glorious. At that point you take a pat on the back and you go, wow, that was amazing, right? So that is the power of strafing, and why you don't take any plane losses. The actual amount of ammunition consumed in the strafe, relatively speaking, isn't that great. With all the ammunition multipliers that you can get about 4 strafes. Now, it changes with the ammunition loadout on the planes. That's the loadout statistic in the thing, but in the port. However, for the most part, you can get 3 good strafes. You can probably get 3 good strafes and then a very small stubby 4th strafe, depending on the ammunition. That's if you're doing offensive strafing. However, if we're playing with fighters, and we're going to talk a little bit about AA here. If I'm fighting and playing, there's an important thing to note about exit strafes. When planes engage, like so, usually what will happen is players might not want to just straight up fly into each other. They don't necessarily want to fly into each other and then engage. What they might try and do is strafe through your fighter and kill 1 or 2 planes with a head-on strafe. That means you are now down to 4 planes and he's got 5 planes, assuming you're both Japanese with air supremacy. He can then turn around and engage. Although, yes, he is lower in ammunition, he has 1 more plane, he's now going to beat you. Alternatively, if you're coming from a head-on pass, what I like to do is I don't necessarily like to strafe because I don't want to waste necessarily the ammunition, so I might expect the strafe and then juke and then move out of the way. And then he strafes through, and then I can turn around, and then I've got the option to strafe from behind. This is an advanced tactic which we'll talk about in episode 6, or alternatively just engage the target. That's normal strafing. Exit strafing is when the fighters are tagged, you can use the alt attack strafe and then you can break away. Now this is interesting because, and this again will be covered in episode 6 with aggressive strafes, if your bombers are coming right past this fighter, he can exit strafe into your bombers and do damage. Now, an exit strafe needs 2 things. It needs ammunition, so if your fighters are out of ammo, you cannot exit strafe, and it needs at least 2 planes. If your fighter wave only has 1 fighter left, you cannot exit strafe because it will kill the plane wave. Now, I'm not sure about the Saipan because I haven't actually tested that, whether 1 plane can break away, but I think the ruling is you need at least 2 fighters to do an exit strafe. If it's a 5 versus 5 fight, currently dueling, and the red team's fighter exit strafes, he will immediately lose a fighter plane. Just by it's just a cost of the ability, and he'll go down to 4. However, he'll break away, and then you can immediately control the fighter plane and tell it to go where as soon as it exits its strafe. The green fighter in this instance is technically paralyzed. It will not follow. It doesn't do anything. It just loiters in the area. Now this is important because if you're the green carrier and you're not paying attention that the red carrier has exit strafed, your fighter will loiter. This means you are vulnerable to other attacks or AA. You can, if you pay attention that the red team is exit strafed, immediately control your fighter and chase after him if you want to, but you have to tell him to do that. Alternatively, you can pull away. Now, there are reasons for exit strafing. In this particular instance, let's say the green team wants to fight the red team's fighters. Maybe it's just a 1 versus 1 in this scenario. He tags the enemy fighter. But all of a sudden he realizes there's a hidden destroyer behind the island. The destroyer's anti-aircraft fire is within range of this fighter duel. This is not good. You are probably going to lose this duel because the passive AA of the destroyer, even if it's not very high, plus the fighters fighting each other, it's not a fair fight now. It's slightly tilted in the enemy's favor. You're probably going to lose all your planes. The best thing you can probably do if you don't have another plane coming in to assist is to exit strafe. Exit strafe outside of the AA of the enemy destroyer. You will lose a plane, but the fact is you may be able to salvage the situation, get your planes out of the AA range, and then you can either come back and reload and refuel, or you can lure the enemy fighter perhaps over friendly AA. And this is where I'd like to talk about the importance of friendly and hostile anti-air. When it comes to fighter dueling, in a longer game, you want to win every fighter engagement. Typically speaking, in this tier 7 or 8 brackets, you have 3 waves. Or how should I say this? If you're a 2-2-2 Hiryu, that means you've got 2 groups of 5 fighters. You have 30 fighters roughly in total. There's a slight discrepancy depending how it goes, but the point is you've got 3 full takeoff launches, as it were. That means you can afford to lose the first takeoff wave, the second takeoff wave, but the third takeoff wave, that's your last one. You have no others. So it's very important that you win every engagement, or you don't just be sacrificial, because you can be bled dry of fighters easily by the halfway point of the game within 10 minutes. And you can be bled dry even quicker if you're not being very smart. This has big implications. If you have no fighters left because you've lost them all, and the enemy carrier has just 1 wave left over, it doesn't matter he has only just 1 wave, it's huge. He now has complete denial over all your bombers. You have no ability to get in, and you have to spread them all out and try and fly all the way around to spread them out. His bombers can attack your ships unmolested at any time, so he can go for any straggler that you can't protect. and he can use the fighters in a sort of discarded scouting mode because they have no longer any value in terms of preventing enemy bombers or preventing enemy fighters from scouting, so he can use them to scout. So every fighter duel is very important. And this comes back now to fighting with an advantage of yourself. So, for example, the standard AA range can usually be attributed to 7.2 kilometers. Or we'll keep it to 6, right, just as an example, without going too over the top. So here we can see sort of an AA field of what 6 kilometers sort of looks like. And we're going to give ourselves a friendly ship. Let's say it's a cruiser. It's kind of over here. And our chap also has, let's have a look, friendly field of 6 kilometers. And we'll just get out of the way so we can get a hold on these things. Like that. So by knowing what the AA kind of envelope is, we know that in this particular scenario, which happens frequently ranked, the enemy team, let's say, is in the bottom right hand of the map, and we are in the top left hand of the map. We know that roughly there's this unspoken line that is the sort of killing zone. You can't go beyond this line. So in fighter duels, and this is perhaps bordering more on advanced techniques now, we know that our fighters can go right up to the edge and no further. Or alternatively, our dive bombers can go up to the edge and scout without taking AA hits and no further. Or they can fly into enemy AA and try and spot ships. So our fighters are now dancing, because against a competent opponent, neither of us wants to fight in each other's AA bubble. There's no point. If we fight in the other person's bubble, we're going to lose, because provided there's good communication, the ships inside our friendly AA bubble are going to target the enemy fighters, and then we're going to win. So usually what happens is the AA bubbles are no-go zones, and typically carriers trying to use the empty space to approach and make their their attack runs or their kind of scouting, that type of thing. So when you are fighting, the importance is, if you can, you want to lure the enemy CV into your AA bubble. So the importance is, know where your AA ships are, know roughly what their ranges are. If you can lure, or if you can get enemy fighters inside the AA range and then tag them, you don't need to strafe them, you just need to tag them. He is now taking losses from the AA, he's taking losses from your fighters, and if he chooses to exit strafe, provided he's not a Saipan, he will lose a fighter, and already you're ahead. And it's just these small margins that you're looking for getting ahead. And conversely, this is also why stealthy ships, and we'll talk about this in episode 6 about advanced tactics, can be tricky, because you might think, hey, there's nothing here, I could totally take him. I could totally take on these fighters. Maybe my team wants to move up and I don't want him to see my destroyers or something, so I'm going to fight outside of my AA envelope and I want to attack the enemy fighters. Right? At the moment, it seems perfectly reasonable. There doesn't seem like there's a problem, but you weren't aware of that hiding destroyer behind the island. You didn't know where he was, you didn't see it. And all of a sudden you've engaged and you realize, oh, crap. I'm inside a hostile AA bubble now, and all of a sudden things become, you can see where things are. You didn't know where they were before, but now you do, and you're like, do I stay and fight the fighters and stay there because perhaps your ships will move up and compensate, and then you're both inside AA bubble, or possibly it's a case of I need to break off and I need to exit. I need to exit strafe. In episode 6, we'll talk a little bit more about advanced elements such as doing a kind of AA traps, or knowing that you're going into hostile AA and just forcing it through. But for the most part, if you're going to fight a duel, you want to do it on your terms, and you want to fight over your ships. Now, that's not always possible, because if you want to bomb, you obviously have to go into hostile AA sphere of influence, and you may find that the hostile carrier is only protecting his own ships, and he's not doing anything. And in that respect, you might have to push your fighters in to fight his fighters to get the bombing attack in. But ultimately, in that respect, we'll talk about target selection in a little bit, because that's usually only when there's nothing else better to do. So, a brief conversation about the Saipan. The Saipan is the Tier 7 American aircraft carrier, premium, and it has a unique attribute about it. Due to its smaller plane waves, yet higher tiers, it does not suffer from a plane loss due to exit strafing. This means if I was a Saipan player, I can play extremely strafe heavy because I have a lot of ammunition. You're an American aircraft carrier. You have a lot of ammunition by default. It means it's a lot of fuel for strafing. So my planes can strafe. Did I get anything? Did I kill anything? Yes, I did. He now tags me. I'm inside hostile AA. Does it matter? I can now exit strafe and leave immediately. Yes, I'm using ammunition, but the exit strafe doesn't kill a plane, and then I can turn around and I can strafe again, exit strafe again, exit strafe, while the enemy carrier, if it's not a Saipan, cannot afford to strafe and tag. He cannot afford to exit strafe because it will cost him planes and he will lose the fighter duel over time. This is what makes the Saipan very powerful, perhaps overly powered, as of version 6.4. And the Saipan can strafe into hostile AA and break away at his whim. However, if you chase and you strafe into enemy Saipan's planes and you drift into a hostile AA bubble, the Saipan will just tag your planes and then keep you tagged because now you're fighting on his terms. Right, moving on, because we have to kind of don't want this lecture to go on too long. We're going to talk about target selection. Oh, just before that, we want to say there's one final element about Fighter Macro is, do you protect your bombers or do you protect the friendly fleet? So if I was the red carrier in this instance, I have my kind of fighter planes, and here we have our bombers. Now the question here is, do I look for a target or a straggler? And let's say I know there's a straggling battleship over here. The question is, should I send my bombers after this lone battleship by themselves and keep my fighters over my team? Or, knowing that that lone battleship only has fighter cover, should I send my fighters with it? Send the entire group? Because the red team may have his own bombers going for your team. And this is the conundrum. Do you keep your fighters over your team to intercept enemy bombers, or do you use them to escort your own bombers? Now, this is something that I can't tell you what to do. This has to be based on your experience. Attacking into a hostile ship that's got fighter cover is very difficult. Currently, the red team here has the advantage because he has managed to bait you to protect your bombers with his fighters. He's working on friendly anti-air, the red team. Plus, he can attack your green battleship with his own bombers and doesn't have to worry about your fighters. So now the red carrier has an easier time than you do. Plus, once you do go into the engagement, if the red carrier is smart, he'll allow you to get inside the AA bubble as long as possible. He'll try and strafe you. He'll try and strafe your bombers at any given cost. Then he might tag your fighters. Your bombers would then come in for the attack on the battleship. However, let's be clear here, there's nothing stopping him from exit strafing. So attacking an isolated target that's got fighter cover is very, very difficult. You might want to protect your bombers to fend off enemy fighters, and if you can, maybe you'd want to fight the enemy fighters at a greater distance, but you're still not protecting your fleet, and then go after an isolated target. But this is a trickier thing to do than just finding an isolated target that isn't fighter protected or having a fighter duel elsewhere. But it still means you're abandoning your own fleet to, the mercy of the enemy carrier, because you don't have fighters, and if that guy doesn't have a defensive fire or he doesn't have strong AA, he could be killed. So it's about you reading the map and the situational awareness to decide, should I protect the few ships that I've got left on my team, or is there time for me to go after an enemy ship? Did I strafe the enemy carrier and kill all his planes? Well, that means it's going to be at least 60 seconds to 2 minutes before he can come back and attack again. That maybe gives me an opportunity to use my fighters to protect my bombers to go after an enemy ship. This is something that comes with experience, and you'll have to decide for yourself. Now, we want to talk about target selection, and we've been sort of drifting into this element. Target selection is a difficult element to discuss because it comes with experience. Usually in a very high anti-aircraft game, where there's a lot of AA on the enemy team, the best targets for Japanese carriers, and even Americans to an extent, are the destroyers. Destroyers will go into capture points, and they don't have the greatest AA. Some of them, a lot of them don't have defensive fires, and provided you're good with your cross-dropping technique, you can kill off these ships, or you can wound them, or at the very least you can spot them, and your own friendly destroyer that's coming into the same capture point, for example, can maybe gun them down because you've given them a health advantage. You've damaged the enemy destroyer, or you're at least spotting them, and maybe your destroyer's in smoke. So destroyers are always a good target to go after in terms of target selection. Lone wolves, battleships that go away from the pack, anyone that's kind of isolated is good. If it's a cruiser, think, well, is it likely he will have sonar? Will he have a defensive fire? If it's a defensive fire, we'll talk about defensive fire baiting in more advanced tactics in episode 6. But possibly we can go after him. Or if the enemy team is just extremely well defended, then it's a game of patience. We're just going to have to wait. There's no target we can go for, so we're going to scout with the dive bombers, we're going to wait with our torpedo bombers, and just protect our fleet with our fighters. And we'll just have to wait for a target to come. That comes with experience, knowing when something becomes possible to attack. If the game becomes more desperate, and we'll talk about this in advanced tactics later, about desperate plays, you're deliberately putting yourself in a disadvantaged situation, but if time doesn't permit you to wait and you have to attack into a disadvantaged situation, then there's no other option. There's one other topic I wanted to go back to about fighter micro, and that was sight denial. And I'll talk about this very briefly. Because it's very difficult to actually show it in an actual game. If, for example, and this goes back to launch order at the beginning, there's a capture zone in the center, and both our destroyers are going for the capture zone in the center, I'm going to load fighters first, and I'm going to have the fighters fly immediately over to the center, and the enemy carrier might do fighters first, or he might do bombers first, or whatever. The whole point is I want to be ahead of our destroyer to spot anything in advance, but also if we see a hostile plane come up, we want to intercept him, or at least he'll think, I don't want to go there, and he'll fly away. Or if his fighters come along, we want to push the fighting line away from the detection range of the destroyer so that we see the hostile destroyer and the enemy team can't see our destroyer. That means all the firepower of the red team can't shoot the green team's destroyer, whereas the green team can see the red team destroyer, or at the very least and engage it, or you're just guaranteeing, even if there wasn't a red team destroyer, that your green team destroyer is not seen. That is sight denial, and this is important because he means he can now capture the capture point unmolested, and he doesn't need to use a smoke charge, which can be very important in competitive games later down the line. Now, this can be dangerous because, as we've spoken, you may be going into an enemy AA field, so you may not actually want to fight or engage, you just want to posture but not engage, and then fall back. If the red team comes at you, fall back with the fighters. Then you turn around and you think you might posture to attack fire, because the red team fighter doesn't necessarily want to fight over the green destroyer, because the green's anti-air is going to help your fighter in engagement with the red fighter plane. So as soon as he might see the destroyer, he might fall back, or you might pressure him back. So it's a dance between the fighters, you using your destroyer's anti-air, it's very good in Akizuki, for example, and the red team trying to see it, and you just saying, no, you can't look at my destroyer, I'm going to prevent you from doing it. That is sight denial. Right, moving on. Last topic before we go into our training battle here is bombing. So I'm going to talk about this briefly, and then we'll just simply go into a training room. I'll show the types of bombing and other elements of what we talked about, and then we might even go into a random battle. So, first things first, the difference between auto and manual bombing. Auto bombing is when you just left click on a target, has a larger reticle, there's a greater chance to miss, and we'll show this in the training room, I guess, in a moment. The spread happens. We know that using manual bombing is better, it's more accurate, it's more refined, you can get better results. However, in the tier 4 and 5s, you're locked into auto bombing, whereas from 6 upwards, we can use manual. 99 times out of 100, we always want to use manual bombing. There's a topic known as strike group management. This is basically how you control your bombers. If your bombers are going to a target, you can, as you control them, is there hostile AA? Is there a battleship in the way? Do you want to, or is there a destroyer in the way and you want to go for the battleship? Well, rather than flying right past the destroyer, tell them to waypoint around so that you don't look, because even if the destroyer's AA is very weak, if he kills just one torpedo bomber, well, you've gone down from 8 down to 7. Your one wave has gone from 4 down to 3. That hurts. You know, every that's like 7,000 damage right there because you didn't want to fly just a little bit further away. So think about the management of your planes if you're going to attack. You also want to take into consideration that, hey, are there enemy fighters incoming? Are they coming in from the flank? do I need to spread out? Because if he's coming in and you don't have fighters to engage, you need to scatter. You need to make it as hard as possible so that the enemy fighter can't strafe all your planes. He'll probably focus your torpedo bombers first since they're the highest targets. That's when you need to just either duke strafes and get your fighters in and tag them, or at the very least strafe his fighters, or fall back to a friendly cruiser that's got AA. So that's briefly strike group management. And controlling your planes when they're out for a bombing run. That's usually you want to focus if all your planes are compacted in one big death ball going for a target. Target approach, I guess we touched upon that a few seconds ago. If you want to approach an enemy ship, first of all, is there anything in your way? Is there a destroyer? So if so, we want to go around, for example. And then the next thing is, the last thing you want to do is approach enemy target directly from behind. If we approach a target from behind, it means that we are inside their AA bubble for the greatest period of time. Even if it's just a 5 kilometer AA range from this battleship, by chasing into the battleship, he is sailing away, which means we're longer inside the AA bubble. Ideally, what we want to do is approach perpendicular 90 degrees like this. This means the time inside the AA bubble is short. And then also, when it comes to torpedo bombing, we don't actually want to attack from the nose, because it's very easy for the ship in question to turn into the planes if we come at the wrong angle, because he only has to turn a short duration to turn into the wave. So ideally, we want to come in at 90 degrees and slightly from behind. Then we line up, drop our torps, and we position as appropriate. If the ship turns left like this into the torpedoes, then rather than going straight in, we position the torpedo bombers and go like that, so that we position it in such a way that he will always be torped on right side. And if the ship then turns away from the torpedo bombers can follow, and then they can attack on the side. Or you can split up and you can have one torpedo bomber coming from the flank and the other one from the other side, and he gets cross-dropped. Dive bombers, it really doesn't matter. Probably chasing from the side or from behind is ideal, coming down perpendicular and then dropping on top. We'll talk about advanced tactics later about how to maximize the damage, but that is the rudimentary approach to attacking a ship. We'll show you that in the actual random battle, because there's no point going over it in any great detail. The final element is how to extradite your planes from the bomb area. There's no point loitering around over the ship once you've attacked them, unless you want to keep it scouted if it was a destroyer. Planes will automatically return to your carrier. Now the problem is, we've got an enemy destroyer, maybe it's an Akizuki that's got good anti-aircraft guns. We don't want to fly straight over the Akizuki, so at that point, don't just immediately forget about your bombers once they've done the attack. Actually consider, hey, flying back over out of the AA range of the destroyer, and then with a left click, and then you can shift click to set up waypoints, as we've talked about in a previous episode. And so if you shift F is the return key and shift is the basically chaining things up, you can left click over here and then you can shift F click, so the plane will fly over to there, and as soon as it reaches there, because you hit shift F, it will then go back to your carrier wherever it is. That means it will fly immediately out of the AA field, stay outside the AA field of enemy ships, and then go back to your carrier in a safe path. Now, with that classroom lesson done, which was quite a long one, let's turn off the map in the classroom and let's go into our training room. So we got a bunch of inert targets for us to work on today. So we have our 6 plane waves down the bottom, or our hear you. We're currently, again, still on the map New Dawn. We're just waiting for the actual battle to start. I know most of the enemy ships will be up here in the north, and we're basically just going to talk about everything we've covered already, but just sort of a more general approach. The reason we didn't just do this right away is the training rooms only last 20 minutes, so we've already been having a conversation now for about 40. Right, so you notice the times are different. 15, 12, 15. It's because the plane waves are smaller in the Japanese. If I want torpedo 1, oh, I don't want the torpedo plane. The plane's going to take off. You can right-click, and it'll cancel it. And it won't take off. Also, I'm going to do a complete line. So I'm going to go 1, and I can go shift like this. So that's me holding the shift and then the number keys. And you see that everything's numbered. Actually, you know what? I don't want the torpedo bombers to be in front of the dive bombers. Well, we can right-click on the torpedo bombers. That cancels the queue, and we'll see that the order now has moved to the dive bombers, as we were talking about earlier. So that's launch order control, and that's cancelling takeoff sequence. So let's say in this instance, we have our fighters. We want to fly to B as quickly as possible. Perhaps we are doing some form of sight denial, or we just want to see what's happening in B as quick as possible, or we just don't want the enemy flying anywhere near our team. Now that we've got the dive bombers up, let's say we don't want to attack with the dive bombers, so I'm going to hold down the Alt Fire button, I'm going to drop the bomb, and then I'm going to shift click elsewhere so that he doesn't automatically return. See, if I drop the bomb load to the second one, and then don't give it any other orders, the bomber will drop its payload, and then immediately return to the carrier, which we don't want. We want it to scout, so we tell it to go elsewhere. So the dive bombers, when the payload is dropped, are significantly faster. So if I get the fighter and the dive bomber together with the drop payload, we'll do a speed test. We tell them to go to the same area. You notice there's just enough speed difference between the dive bomber and the fighter that it can outrun it. So long as you keep a safe, healthy distance, there's no reason why it would ever be caught. So we're going to use our dive bombers to spot the enemy inert fleet. We'll move our carrier closer just for the sake of attacking. So with the fighter juking, we're going to do that in a training battle, in the actual random battle for today. This is really just an example. What I'm going to show you here today is a bit about bombing and the approach and how we might attack something. And also perhaps, I think in the advanced tactics we'll talk about cross-dropping destroyers, but if we come across one of them, we'll just have a brief overview. So in this particular instance, we have an Eisenhower. And the Eisenhower is nose on to us, which isn't ideal, because we want to attack the Eisenhower. Let's say that's our target. In this particular instance, the Ranger's too close to the island for us to attack it from this direction, from the south. We can't honestly come around because we would be inside the Eisenhower's kind of passive AA. We can't go for that. The Mahan is actually a good target, even though it's next to the Colorado. We could also go for the Colorado. In this instance, let's say we wanted to attack the Eisenhower, that was our option. And the best thing, we don't want to go at him too close. We want to keep a relatively safe distance away from its anti-air. And then, as it's progressing, we would come along and we want to come at it from a right angle. And it's even fine to come slightly, like this, kind of an angle. And then when it comes to the actual bombing run itself, we want to come at them slightly from behind. The idea is you want to come at them like this, that type of approach. And then you give them enough lead depending how quickly the Eisenhower is going. So by coming at from this direction, if the battleship turns away, he'll still eat all 4 torpedoes. And if he turns in, so let's hypothesize here that if the battleship is turning in, because I'm coming at from this angle anyway, the ship would then still turn into all 4 torpedoes regardless. If I come at him from the side, from the nose, then it's much easier for the battleship to turn in and then sail between the torpedoes. So typically you don't want to come at from behind directly because you can sail away and be in your AA longer. You want to come at from either the flanks, slightly from behind, and then you want to lead the target depending how quickly he's going, and then drop your payload. Right, that is enough for the training room. We don't necessarily want to talk about this too much. Let's go into a random battle, and we can put what we've learned to the test. Because we had an unfortunate incident of using the we'll give it another go. Yesterday, when we were doing this with episode 4, it put us into a tier 9 battle, which was hilarious. Let's see what happens today. We'll put on a nice, just basic camouflage to reduce our concealment, and version of shells, as we covered in episode 3 with regards to ship setup. We'll make sure we've got the correct modules set up. Yep. Alright, here we go into random battle. So here we are going into our random battle. Depending on what the team composition is, we can decide what planes we want to take off in what sequence, and then whether we want to scout or not, and decide whether or not we want to do sight denial or not, depending on the destroyer. So we'll just sit and be patient and see what our team is. So this matchmaking is okay. I know the enemy carrier ranger. He happens to do fires 2 dive bombers, the last game we played. We got some tier 7 battleships. They're going to make it slightly difficult for the Hiryu to attack. In terms of cruisers, the Edinburgh we know doesn't have a defensive fire. The Hipper may have a hydro rather than defensive fire. The Shores and the Duka may have defensive fires. And the destroyers are also potentially good targets. On our team, we've got a Kutuzov. That's quite good. So we should have good like a rallying point if we want to use friendly AA. And our map is a standard battle on north. So we're not going after capture points immediately. It's just going to be more of a longer kind of standoff game. I think I'll go fighter first. There's no rush to a capture point. I don't think their destroyers will rush in a predictable manner. Because if it was a domination battle, there's capture points. You can anticipate enemy destroyers going for capture points for early caps. Those are ones you can catch off by, you know, sending torpedo bombers first and dive bombers and focusing on them and killing them off. We're not going to have this game, so we're going to do fighters first, just to get up in the air, see where the enemy group is going in a general maneuver. And we'll keep all our bombers available because I don't feel like we need to scout with dive bombers. We're not necessarily, we know the enemy carriers not strike. We don't have to worry about incoming massive attacks on our guys, so we don't need to spot. And it's not like a lot of destroyers and we have to spot lots of torpedoes. So in this instance, I think we can afford to have all our planes or our bomber planes together in one area until we find a target of opportunity. Now I know that the enemy ranger has double fighters, which means his fighters will beat mine, so I have to be mindful of using things to my advantage, such as friendly AA. I know my Kutuzov, by looking at the map, is on the west side. I like to use the hold down the shift button while I rotate through the planes and then tell them all to go. Okay, so first fighter's going towards the Kutuzov, that's fine. He's going to enter the AA bubbles. If the Kutuzov has any AA skills, or even just passive AA is enough, I'm going to try and tag the fighter to make it punish him for leaving. That means I'm going to get behind him first. Paying attention? Oh, it's just outside the barrage. Like by the tiniest of margins, right? Tag him. Right, he's not escaping. That's fine. That was quite good for us. Enemy carrier was caught napping. Now, as the Tirpitz, it might be by on its own. We see a dive bomber, so let's get some free plane kills. We want to help our team here. We don't want him to give him free hits. Oh, he's running away. I think you're too close. He's trying to juking it. I might have... Ah, see, now that we see more, we'll call the fighter back immediately. We got a couple of hits. There's too many things in this one area for me to seriously consider attacking, especially since they've got tier 6 torpedo bombers. I don't want to be wasteful with my planes. I think the Farragut could be useful. He is isolated, so we might go after the Farragut. This is us thinking about target selection. Who's isolated? What can I do? What can I attack? Now we just learned there's a Cruiser Dios there, but we want to help, I think, our Hatsuharu. It's narrow. The problem is we've got narrow islands. It's very difficult to torpedo, and he's smoking, so I'm thinking this might be a bad time to attack, and maybe not. Oh, and I just realized... If you double tap the flight number, by the way, you select them. Right, no, we can't see where he is. We don't know what's going on. We've already lost a dive bomber. We're just going to back off at this. There's no point going for it. We can be patient. Our Hatsuharu, he's spotted due to the enemy dive bomber. He is playing kind of poorly, but I don't see anything in the smoke, and I don't feel like I have to attack. So I'm going to exercise patience rather than going in unnecessarily. Tagging the fighter should be okay. It's a 3-on-2 scenario. Okay. Perhaps there's AA, perhaps the Shores is having an impact. I'm looking at the Shores and I think Hey, he just took a big hit. He might escape, but with dive bombers, I don't need to waste torpedo bombers. But with dive bombers, I can probably punish him, maybe get some fires in, or just do straight up enough damage with my dive bombers to kill him off. Nope, no need, he died. Okay. But the Nagato, now that I just see him with my planes, is an isolated target. That seems pretty good for me. Doesn't seem to have any good strong AA nearby. Edinburgh is a little bit off. I'm going to send just the one to trigger a fire. It's more of an advanced tactic. But I want to kind of win this guy as much as I possibly can. Now, what I'm doing right now, I'll talk about in episode 6. But for the most part, in terms of target selection, he's perfect because he's not next to... He's basically alone and he has no one to help him out. Oh dear. Didn't see the fire incoming. That's a bit of a bummer. Over there. Have our tagged torpedo bomber go back to friendly AA. Maybe something can be done. We have fire and flooded this guy, but see her damage counter? It's not moving. Oh, maybe we didn't get fire, but well, we didn't definitely get a flood either. So we'll follow it up with the next dive bomber. See if we can't trigger an extra fire. Yep, we got a fire. So now he's on 2 fires, because it was the original one and the one we just tagged on him. He clearly doesn't have a damage control party, so it was still a good target to hit. Yes, we're going to lose the dive bomber. Now, as far as the extraction of how to extract your planes out of the area, rather than having it sending it straight back to my carrier, I'm going to have it fly directly over the Gneisenau, and hopefully the AA of these 2 ships will kill off this plane, or save me my dive bomber. And the carrier player isn't controlling it, so I'm just going to keep it loitering in this area directly over the Gneisenau's maximum AA. And bring up my fighters as well to maybe help out. And while all this is going on, we'll launch our other planes. There we go, enemy fighter's dead. We managed to save 2 dive bombers, which we could use to scout, or in this instance, I feel like I'm going to use my fighters to go into the center of the map, forward the Hatsuharu, give him perhaps some air cover, protecting my team. And in terms of targets, what can we go after? Looking at the wider map again, so this is me in the strategic map mode, I can see that the Byron's potentially a good target, Tirpitz is potentially a good target. Hold that thought, because now we're going to try and save our Gneisenau from being dive bombed, although he's probably going to get there before we will. Due to the nature we can't get a good strafe from behind, we're just going to have to strafe over the Gneisenau and possibly tag the second group. We're going to get the first wave out of the way, so I'm going to exit strafe so that I don't strafe my own plane. There we go, killed him off. I'm going to call the second fighter back so we can recharge it. I notice his planes are slow, it means he's got the evasive maneuvers skill from episode 2, remember when I told you don't do that? Because it's slow and it makes it easy strafes. I'm going to keep punishing these planes because I want to fend them off. I notice now that there's also an Edinburgh coming up on my flank, situational awareness. We talked about that in episode 4. I'm going to re-strafe. There's no point clicking on these planes, I would just lose ammunition on our planes. Oh wow, he juked it. Well, there you go. That's fine. We're practically out of ammunition, no big deal. Now the threat here is the Edinburgh. I was going to go after other ships on the side, but right now the biggest threat is to me, the Edinburgh, and to our Sims. I'm going to turn my ship around, start making full speed to escape, and I'm going to send the dive bombers and the torpedo bombers after the Edinburgh. Oh, enemy Blizka. I'm going to send my 1 fighter over there to provide scouting support. This is kind of just general plane control. We see Torps incoming. He's probably here. We don't know where he is. We don't need to rush it. We don't need to attack the smoke. We'll have the fighter spot the Blizka and spot for Torps. This will give our Hatsu the chance to attack him. We send the second fighter up as quickly as we can to get down to the capture point because this fighter has no ammunition. And we just remain patient. Now we can keep the dive bombers over the smoke because that way we can see Torps coming from the smoke and we can also see if he exits, and it means that our torpedo bombers won't be susceptible to AA from the Edinburgh. And at this point, it's time to call back the fighter. Did its job, and I don't want to fight the fighter because there's no point. Now, we know the Oba is getting close to this Edinburgh, so I think it's time to get our torpedo bombers in position ready. We're also looking for gunshots and anything else. So see my second wave, we know that the other carrier player isn't particularly good, he's not focusing, and he's just kind of looking stubbornly at my one fighter. He hasn't controlled it, so I can use the predicted path to barrage him and kill off the planes. We also see the Edinburgh is up now because of a proximity spot. He's quite tricky to hit because he's going close to the islands, so I'm going to split up from both directions. I don't think I can honestly hit him with torpedo planes, but we can hit him with dive bombers, so we can cause some fires. In fact, we're not going to hit him with torpedo bombers, so we're going to waypoint them around. Is our damage number going? It's not. That's a 5-second repair time. So we're going to go for the Edinburgh again with the second dive bombers because we know 5 seconds is expired. These are tactics beyond basic flight control. We're talking more about advanced stuff here. We're going to get fresh hit on... Oh, it's RNG. He's beached himself though. That is a torpedoable target. There's enough activation time. The 3 group needs to rotate him round, but the 4 group can probably get in there. I need to get him slightly from behind. I can't really go from the nose, which is why we're going to spend a little bit more time inside his A to make sure we get a good run. I'm expecting him to go forwards or backwards. I was expecting, because the maneuverability of British ships, he could have gone forwards, he could have reversed. Getting 2 hits in, getting a flooding, firing a flooding now, he'll burn and die before he can do anything about it. Oh, he damaged content 600 health. Well, one would assume, hopefully, that our Ioba can finish him off, and he's even healing, so we may have to send follow-up waves. We look at the map again. We ourselves, the carrier, are not under threat. In terms of scouting, we could try and scout more of the enemy team, but it doesn't feel like it's really necessary because enough of them is spotted. We don't really need to spot the carrier. It's not a pressing urgency at this time. We might send our fighters down to prevent the enemy team from spotting our ships, specifically the destroyer, over the capture point because we're about to capture the base. In terms of target choices, the Edinburgh killed the Oba, so we'll probably go for him again, finish him off if he was a threat, but the game's probably going to end before then. And then after that, isolating the Nagato and the Tirpitz one at a time is also a totally legitimate tactic, but the game ends before that can happen. So if we were to have a brief look again at our tactics map, just clear all of this. So in this particular instance, we are spawning as the north as the carrier in that particular game. We know it's a standard battle, so we don't have capture points in the centres to deal with. Well, that wasn't actually that map, was it? Well, regardless, the point I'm trying to get at is that we spawn in the north, the enemy team's in the south. It's a standard battle, which means in terms of what planes do I launch first, what order I have, my launch order in terms of plane control, well, there's no rush to bomb because we don't expect the enemy destroyers to be really in close for capture points. It's a standard battle. So in that respect, I might just go fighter first. If it's a capture domination battle, I maybe send the bombers first. In terms of which planes used to scout, well, I didn't feel that it was necessary to scout because there were only a few destroyers in this particular game. I didn't feel the need to send additional dive bombers to look at flanks or look at gaps between islands. So I didn't feel the necessary need to use scouting planes between the island groups because there were only a few destroyers. I didn't, it was a waste. I'd rather want to concentrate my potential to do damage. So I want the dive bombers to do damage. So it was fighters, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, group up the torpedo bombers and dive bombers, and with the fighters that we've got in that particular game, we went and engaged the enemy Rangers fighters. Now, the enemy Ranger has the fighter setup. Because he's fighter setup, the enemy Rangers 2 fighters are going to be better than our fighters. He can outmuscle them. It's just the nature of the balance between American and Japanese carriers. So to use this, we have to use a ship to our advantage. This means using friendly or hostile anti-air. And in this instance, we knew we had a friendly cruiser, and it was actually a very good one, a Kutuzov. The enemy carrier wasn't paying attention. He sent his planes into the Kutuzov's AA field, and we then went to engage. And we were fine with engaging the enemy fighters. We did a strafe as well because he wasn't paying attention, but assuming he was a better player than he was, even just tagging was enough because the Kutuzov can do some damage. Maybe the player can defensive fire just to focus down more of the fighters if he wants. And the breakaway exit strafe will hurt the ranger because you'll lose a plane because he's not a Saipan, so you're already a couple of planes ahead. In terms of ammo usage, at no point were we really short of ammo. Near the end, we were using our fighter to scout. So in an advantage of what planes to scout, even though we didn't have a dive bomber free, it was worth using the fighter to scout, because if we didn't use the fighter to scout at the end, we had a friendly destroyer in smoke, which is not a gunboat, it's a Hatsuharu, versus a Blaviska, I believe that's what it was, hostile destroyer, who isn't in smoke. Our fighter is keeping him lit up and sighted, allowing our Hatsuharu to kill him off, whereas the Blaviska can't see or destroy in the smoke, otherwise it'd be both equally blind, and we could have lost that player. It would have been better to scout with a dive bomber, but since we didn't have opportunity, we used our one fighter. As soon as we saw a hostile fighter coming to shoo us away, we stayed for as long as we possibly could, and I didn't want to use the planes. The enemy destroyer dies. Even then, he was going into the smoke, so there's no point staying with the plane. We immediately recall him and run away. There's no point fighting. We will for another day. And at that point, also, as the fighter's chasing our original Hoon, who's coming back to our carrier for the return, I realized that he hasn't pulled it off. He's not necessarily doing anything with it. He's just chasing it. He's not paying attention, so we can do a cross strafe, kill off. We don't want to tag it, it's wasteful. His planes can kill our planes, but with the strafe we can kill off the wave. So that's a little bit of fighter micro. When to strafe, it's luring and baiting perhaps. These are more advanced tactics we'll talk about episode 6 with our other wave running away, scouting with the correct planes and when to scout. When it came to bombing, well, at the end, we had, for example, the enemy cruiser, the Edinburgh, who was a potential threat to ourselves because he could, in theory, continue north and then attacked us. We didn't have much cover. We knew he was in smoke, so we're playing patient. The dive bombers were spotting the smoke on either side of the Edinburgh. In this particular instance, that is the spot for enemy torpedoes coming from him, so he doesn't surprise our other ships, and also to see when he leaves, because once he leaves the smoke, the instant AA is going to be on the dive bombers. We don't want to lose planes from our torpedo bombers. Our torpedo bombers want to, are our damage dealers, so we don't want to scout with them, so we want them to live as long as possible. At the time that the Edinburgh went into the islands, we can't torp him because the activation range won't work, so we'll fly them around. Once he keeps on going, we're just watching what's happening. We can do dive bombers for fires, do some damage, watch for damage control. We watch our damage counter on the top right. If the damage counter stops, we know that on cruisers the damage control party only lasts 5 seconds. We can follow up with another dive bomber, do some fires, and then once we realized the Edinburgh had beached himself while he was fighting our friendly Aoba, we're able to come in from a favourable angle, that is slightly from behind at an angle so he can't race forwards and dodge them, and get a couple of critical hits and some floodings. And that it would have guaranteed the kill. He was 651 health, but for all intents and purposes he should have died due to the Aoba shots, but we were going to finish him off later. Other target choices of opportunity, you have to know when it's not a good idea to bomb. So, for example, we were all set to go after the Farragut, I believe it was, that was patrolling here in the F5 tile. He seemed like a good opportunity. It was a little bit difficult because he was close to islands for the torpedoes to approach. But then as soon as we realized, oh hey, there's actually an enemy cruiser now with him, and you know what, he's smoked up. All our planes are right there, and we're on the verge of committing. We could totally attack him because everything's there. We're beginning to take a couple of plane losses on the dive bombers. Should I just go for it? Should I just attack him? Well, in this instance, no. I don't feel that's a smart idea. I think I'm going to pull back and look for a different opportunity. I don't feel like it's worth the waste of dropping the entire payload, flying back, reloading, and then coming back out in for a maybe kill. The game isn't at a state where we're desperate enough to do that. There's enough patience that I can pull back and look for a different target. And in this particular instance, our patience paid off because we were able to punish pretty heavily an enemy Nagato that we found just above the enemy capture, who was isolated, didn't have any real protection, and we were able to do some dots and fires and floodings and basically wind him down. In terms of the exiting, once we had bombed the Nagato, our last dive bomber was tagged by an enemy fighter. So in terms of how to extract planes for the bomb era, rather than immediately just flying straight back to my carrier, which would have resulted in just losing the plane, because the enemy carrier wasn't strafing, he was just grabbing, we redirected over to friendly AA, and it's actually a Gneisenau in our team that we flew over, that's right. Bomber just loitered directly over it so that the fighter was over the maximum AA. Fighter dies, our plane can then return safely if we want to conserve planes. And you have to be a little bit mindful sometimes, because there was a destroyer next to the ship, and by luring the planes over friendly AA, you are deliberately lighting up your destroyer due to that anti-air. You know, you're because of the plane that you're luring over it. So is this a smart idea, or am I really screwing over this destroyer by luring planes over them? But in this particular instance, because of the Gneisenau was there and there was no one that really could shoot the destroyer, it was a fair game. I think that's pretty much the topics we've covered today. We've targeted knowing when to bomb, when not to bomb, how to extract planes from the plane area, strike group management, you know, how to group the planes up. We knew that when the fighters came on top of our planes, we sort of spread them out and tried to get planes and fighters to kind of escort and support. The difference between auto and manual bombing, I didn't actually show that in the random battle, but you can tell that the reticle is larger and harder to hit targets, so you definitely want to use manual if you have the opportunity. Patience was involved in this particular game. We didn't go after the Farragut. There were some lone wolves as we went after, such as the Nagato. There were some lone wolves on the west, and so is the Edinburgh. Edinburgh, we know, doesn't have a defensive fire, but can have reasonably good AA. So we went after priority targets, things that were important to us or important to the team's value in winning. In terms of our scouting, we scouted the destroyer when we needed to, we scouted the middle when we needed to, and we did some scouting denial, very little amount, just preventing kind of fighters going over friendly destroyers. It doesn't need to be only dive bombers, we did use fighters as well. We had some good strafes against the enemy carrier, especially against his bombers. It's because they were going slow. Rather than just clicking on them and wasting planes and ammunition, strafing them is the most fuel efficient way of doing it. Yeah, and we covered at the very beginning how we used our fighters against the enemy fighters with AA support. So that covers most of the elements of plane control for episode 5. In this random battle, we did use a few more advanced elements from episode 6, which will be coming shortly. Episode 6 will probably be split into multiple parts just due to the sheer number of topics that can be covered. But we will be looking into advanced bombing, making it so they can't dodge, getting as close as possible, doing what we did to the Nagato this game, doing some fire floods, waiting for a damage condon, doing more fire floods so we can maximize our damage rather than just the alpha strike, forcing ship turns. You know, if a ship is quite maneuverable, or if it's a battleship and we don't think we can kill him, we can force the turn of him by threatening with bombs so that he broadsides other ships. Elements like those lines. So if you want to see what the topics are what are covered, you can check the description of this YouTube video, or you can check the warships forum, which is in the description of the playlist for these videos. Anyway, thank you very much for watching today, and we'll see you next time.